So Brian, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm Brian Bonsack with Wichita State Environmental Finance. Like Savannah said, I'm a career, this is a heads up or whatever, I'm a career fish and wildlife employee that came back to my home state of Kansas to work within Environmental Finance Center here at Wichita State. I've been there about a year and a half, and what I've learned throughout that is that a lot of you water and drinking water professionals are working on similar issues to what we as fish and wildlife agencies are working on. And so what we're trying, and the purpose of the day's webinar really is to try to connect you, give you some resources to think about that might help you connect with fish and wildlife resources in your state. We've got a great presenter, Tim Birdsong from the Texas Parks and Wildlife. Tim is the chief of the Habitat Conservation branch there, and Tim's going to be presenting about programs they have in Texas. And I know when we were looking at the pre-registration list, there was a lot of Texas agencies on there. But what I want you to do, or what I'm hoping you do, is as Tim presents the topics, think about these things from your state perspective. You're going to see, from my perspective, you're going to see a lot of similarities throughout the country as to the issues that state fish and wildlife agencies are working on. And a lot of those topics that we work on as the fish and wildlife side are topics of interest to you. We work on things like invasive species management. We're certainly out there working on habitat restoration and preservation, and so we might be a resource for you, and we might also be a resource for you to help you provide some of the additional program things that you may be thinking of. When I follow the water utilities, I see where some of y'all are out helping stock fish. I see where some of y'all are helping fund recreational developments. So think about that. We have Tim on. Tim is a very active member within our professional society, or our major trade association from the Fish and Wildlife side, and that's the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is a DC-based trade organization that works the Hill. And so, and Tim is a very active participant in committees on there. So with that, Tim is going to give you an overview of the Texas programs, and think about these as to what's happening in your state, and hopefully it will be a benefit to you, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that, Tim, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all. And I'll give you this Texas-specific case study, but keep in mind that the programs that we offer within Texas through the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, that our sister state fish and wildlife agencies spread around the country, offer very comparable programs. Most of the habitat preservation, habitat restoration, invasive species management programs, or recreational access improvements, other sorts of programs that Brian referenced, you can find those embedded within, whether it's a state Department of Natural Resources, if that's where the fish and wildlife programs are embedded within your particular state, or possibly it's similar to Texas, where the State Fish and Wildlife Agency was historically merged with their state parks agency. And there are other sorts of arrangements in different states in the way that the organizational structure is set. But again, most of the states have very similar programs as what we do in Texas. I want to highlight work that we do in Texas and the ways that we cooperate with municipalities and local landowners and conservation nonprofits and other organizations that have shared interest in conservation of freshwater resources. And I want to help you understand a little bit about the perspective of a fish and wildlife agency and kind of what we bring to the table. And when it comes to conservation of freshwater resources, most of that interest is on either component of the two-pronged mission that most of fish and wildlife agencies have, and that's usually conserve fish and wildlife, so working to preserve the diversity of fish and wildlife species that naturally occur in those states. And then the other piece of that mission is to provide recreational opportunities, usually fishing, hunting, other sorts of outdoor recreation opportunities, whether it's birding, other forms of wildlife viewing, or whether it's riding trails, or you name it. It kind of depends on the state and, again, how that agency is structured. But typically a conservation mission and a recreational mission. And so that conservation mission really drives where we invest in things like habitat restoration, habitat preservation, activities on the landscape that result in tangible water quality benefits, water supply benefits. And so in Texas, we have 191 species of native freshwater fishes. We have 5 of those species that are likely extinct. Across North America, a little over 1,200 species of freshwater fishes, and slightly higher extinction rate. Globally, you see the number of species there. Less than 1% are known to be extinct, but we have much better science here in the U.S. and across North America, so we were able to document occurrence of species before human civilization was able to implement some of those development pressures that often lead to extinction events. So the extinction number of species that have gone extinct globally is likely much higher than what's been recorded. But so one of the things that we're trying to do is ensure the long-term persistence of native freshwater fishes. And fish have really high extinction rates. Natural extinction rates are roughly 1 species extinction every 3 million years. And right now we're experiencing across North America a rate that's about 877 times greater than that. And since the 1950s, we've documented about 7.5 species extinctions per decade. And that type of rate is expected to continue on into the future. We expect to see another 53 to 86 freshwater fishes that become extinct by 2050. So we're implementing lots of actions to try to prevent that. The causes for extinction of species, 73% of extinctions that have occurred in North America were attributed to physical habitat alteration. So alteration of stream channels, alteration of springs or other structural habitats that support native freshwater fishes. 68% had to do with introduction of non-native species, typically species that outcompete natives or prey upon. Water quality degradation is also a big issue that's contributed to extinctions. Hybridization between native forms and these non-native exotic forms that they're able to mate with, and then overharvest. So those are some of the reasons for extinction. And habitat and invasive species are 2 of the issues, and water quality are the issues that we really try to focus our investments in. And every state Fish and Wildlife agency across the U.S. has what we refer to as a state wildlife action plan. So we identify a focal set of species, and for each of those, we're assessing status and trends in their populations and identifying conservation needs and trying to develop usually either a range-wide, across their entire range, the area that they occur, developing some sort of range-wide conservation plan to support long-term persistence of that species, or maybe a watershed-based plan or an ecoregion-based plan. But for most of these species, and we have over 1,200 of those across both aquatic and terrestrial wildlife in Texas that are sort of on our watch list. I mean, we have conservation actions that we're trying to drive towards protection of those species. And what we're trying to achieve is we want these wild, naturally produced, self-sustaining populations. And by naturally produced, like all of their life history requirements, everything that they need to do to be able to persist is available in that system naturally. So we're not having to stock species or raise fish in hatcheries and provide these supplemental stockings just to allow them to persist. And we take a very habitat-based approach, looking at watershed conservation. So big investments in conservation of natural land cover, usually an emphasis on restoring grasslands to provide those water quality benefits and help support aquifer recharge and other sorts of benefits. Investments in riparian buffers, so trying to conserve these river corridors and preserve those riparian forests that help manage for natural levels of input of sediment and nutrients and provide connections between terrestrial and aquatic food webs. And those systems also provide riparian shading. So there's some benefits to temperatures in the stream, and also it provides cover. So fish will hang out in those areas, and in areas where you've lost a lot of that canopy and that cover, then oftentimes they won't use those areas of the stream. And then also looking at natural river flow patterns, how we maintain a flow regime that different fish species need to survive, whether that's a pulse flow that cues their spawning, or if it's an overbank flow that allows certain species to have access to a floodplain to spawn, or it's certain base flows in the summer that allow over summer survival. Just those sorts of measures and connectivity, so allowing fish that have migratory life strategies that they can move up and down a river or have access to a floodplain, as I mentioned earlier, for certain portions of their life cycle. And so lots of investments in habitat restoration and preservation to achieve these functional watersheds, those natural physical processes in watersheds that really influence the quality of habitats, and that also have obviously direct benefits to water quantity and quality, and things that most of your organizations are going to be directly interested in. And we try to achieve this through local stewardship. So we're a private land state, and of course most eastern states are. And so a lot of the tools in the toolbox that we use to conserve habitat are incentive-based programs where we cost share. We have cost share arrangements with private landowners. And we usually work with a group of local landowners and local conservation nonprofits and other organizations that those investments can be sustained long term. And the way that we process is we have these different planning regions. Most states, as they go to update the action plan, they'll coordinate a series of stakeholder workshops where they have organizations like yours at the table to help identify strategies to achieve certain conservation outcomes for species and their habitats. And we have these 4 different planning regions in Texas that generally align with our major ecoregions. And then you can see these color-coded polygons that relate to portions of different river basins. These are subwatersheds where the focal species occur. And so conceptually, if we to conserve all of those subwatersheds that are color-coded there, then we would be able to preserve the water fishes that remain in Texas. And that's been a conservation assessment, modeling, and prioritization process that's helped us identify this set of areas that we're investing in heavily. And so this is a somewhat of a busy slide. All these dots, and you'll see that all the red dots, for instance, pertain to habitat protection projects, and green relate to habitat restoration, and yellow are research projects, and so on. And each of those color-coded dots corresponds to a different major goal that we have, that we've identified for conservation of fish statewide. And those projects are in various stages. Those are either in the planning stages, or they're active, or they were recently completed. But this is just the set of projects that we've worked on from fall of 2015 to present. So you can see we have a fairly substantial footprint on the landscape in terms of our investments in habitat restoration, preservation of species management, monitoring, collection of data on status and trends of species and their habitats. So a lot of work that's going on around the state that has direct or indirect benefits to water supplies. One of those incentive-based programs that we support is called the Texas Farm and Rangelands Conservation Program. We provide funding for land trusts to purchase development rights, support, establish conservation easements on large ranches that provide benefits to focal species. But the authorizing legislation for this particular program had a major emphasis on preserving natural landscapes to provide water supply and water quality benefits. So almost all of the projects that we've supported, and we've supported, we're now up to 22 conservation easements as of last month. So we just supported another round of easements, and the acreage is over 35,000 acres now that we've supported since 2016. So that's a program where we work in cooperation with land trusts, and the land trust will typically leverage funding through the U.S. Farm Bill, available through the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, to support the purchase of development rights, and they'll leverage funding from us and some other sources to make these projects happen. But that's been a real effective program in helping preserve these river corridors. The Landowner Incentive Program is a program that was authorized through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service back during the Bush administration, George W. Bush. And this was a program that provided cost share incentives to landowners to support habitat restoration. And the program is no longer federally funded, but it was so successful in Texas that we've kept the program in place and have just relied on funding from other sources, that some private funding, some funding through the Partners Program of the Fish and Wildlife Service. They have a shared interest as us and support provide cost share incentives to support habitat restoration on private lands. Active Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, it's our official nonprofit partner, and they help raise private funds to invest in this. And so some pretty big investments, and the two active funding announcements that we have through this program right now are centered around conserving rivers. One is focused on 3 focal watersheds in central Texas, west of the Austin-San Antonio corridor, and then the other is a program that's focused primarily on streams in West Texas, in the region near Big Bend National Park. And what we do to help identify landowners interested in cooperating with us on restoration projects, and these are mostly restoring springs or riparian areas. A lot of the typical BMPs in terms of fencing cattle out of creeks or out of riparian zones. But we provide a lot of really easy to understand, usable resources where, like this is one example, the My Healthy Stream handbook that was developed by Trout Unlimited. We provide that to some of our cooperating landowners and help them develop a conservation plan for their property that they can buy into, because they're doing most of the work there, and they're having to bring usually a 1-to-1 cost share to help support these restoration projects. But we do lots of workshops. We've done over 30 landowner workshops over the last 5-6 years, and lots of field days, working days, where we provide plant materials and organize these riparian planting projects, all with an emphasis on trying to address erosion and sedimentation issues and water quality degradation, habitat degradation. These photos are all from the Blanco River watershed, which was in the national news back in 2015 when it experienced this historic flooding, and so we've been working with landowners ever since then to try to put forward a kind of natural channel design elements into restoring some of the erosional banks that formed, and help just stabilize soils and restore riparian areas. As part of that, we've established these conservation demonstration areas where many of these riverside landowners, they have an interest in recreation on the river, and so we're trying to help them design some sort of limited recreational access component that is still protective of riparian areas. And this has been a real effective approach for us in places like the Landowner River. This is a river that also experienced historic flooding last fall, and we've invested significantly in trying to support resiliency of riparian areas within the Landowner River watershed, and almost 8,000 acres of habitat restoration projects that we've supported over the last decade, and then conservation agreements with landowners up and down the river, over 25 miles of the river, that landowners have committed to implement certain best management practices to conserve their riparian area. Another big area of investment for us has been management of invasive species, and we're talking about species like giant salvinia and water hyacinth and hydrilla that occur in and other sorts of floating veg that occur in reservoir systems. And then we have species like, tamarisk species, salt cedar, or species like Arundo donax, which is shown there on the right, the river cane. And these can really channelize streams and alter habitat conditions for fish. And when these areas come in, they'll narrow and deepen a channel, and we lose some of the habitat that some of our native darters and minnows and other fishes need to persist. And so our real interest there is just trying to manage the stream corridor and in-stream habitat in a way that supports fish habitat needs. But there are a number of studies, some of those conflicting on whether or not removal of some of these non-natives that use an awful lot of water, they through evapotranspiration and other processes, they can contribute to water supply issues. And again, kind of mixed literature on that, but our focus there is not really on water supply. Our focus is on trying to manage habitat conditions within these in-stream habitats. So some pretty substantial investments in terms of number of rivers and lakes where we've implemented conservation efforts, a number of river miles, and using chemical and biological and mechanical methods to control invasive species. And this has become a water supply issue for our lake systems, in that sometimes these the vegetation, particularly plants like giant salvinia and hydrilla, can clog water intakes. They can also contribute to issues with water conveyance for agriculture. So this is an issue that our state legislature identified as something that went way beyond just recreational access on lakes for boating or fishing. And they recognize it as this multifaceted issue that should be supported with general revenue. So pretty substantial investments just in Texas. I mean, we're looking at about $3.7 million annually that's invested in invasive species management projects, aquatic invasive species management projects. Some other states like Florida, Louisiana, they're spending more on the order of $15 to $20 million annually. So, but they have issues that are a little more severe than ours in Texas. But many other states that deal with invasive aquatic plants have some sort of control program. And this is just within those focal subwatersheds that I talked about earlier. These are the kinds of investments that we've made over the last roughly 5 years. So some big investments in watershed conservation, habitat restoration, as I've mentioned. And you can look at the dollar amounts there. So not a ton of money from Parks and Wildlife, but we bring a lot of other grant dollars from Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other funding sources that oftentimes we're the only eligible entity in the state to receive those funds. If they're tagged as Fish and Wildlife funding, then the State Fish and Wildlife Agency will receive those funds through a congressional appropriation, often through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then we've leveraged those funds with lots of partner matching dollars. So pretty significant funding for habitat restoration projects. So again, kind of a two-pronged mission for most fish and wildlife agencies. One is conservation, and the other piece being more recreation focused. And a lot of those recreational enhancements are geared towards getting people out on rivers and streams, whether it's for fishing or wildlife viewing or otherwise, so that they'll start to care about these systems and then make decisions, whether it's voting or otherwise, to help protect natural, healthy river systems, like some of those systems that are shown here. These are some of our iconic rivers in Texas, like the Pecos. There's a photo top center of the middle reaches of the Brazos River, kind of southwest of Fort Worth. And then the bottom two photos are both of the Devil's River, which is arguably the most pristine river in the southwestern United States, definitely the most pristine river in Texas. And so our interest in trying to build these river stewards and people that care about freshwater resources, and they're going to help us manage, conserve those systems. It's been really assisted by the interest in the growth in paddle sports nationally. So 21.7 million Americans participated in paddle sports in 2014, and many of those are anglers, and over half of those are out there because they want to experience nature. So we have folks that have shared interests as us. They care about our mission, and it's easy to engage paddlers to support our mission. And also river and stream anglers, they care deeply about the things that we care about. And we have some really incredible stream fishing opportunities in Texas. These are routinely highlighted in mainstream fishing publications like Southwest Fly Fishing, and also in Bassmaster magazine and some other angler magazines. But yeah, a lot more fly fishing and paddling, kayak fishing is occurring on Texas rivers now, more so than ever. And you're seeing the same kind of growth across the southern U.S. Stream fishing has, of course, been popular for a long time in the western U.S. with interest from fly anglers and targeting trout. But in the South, there's been a big emphasis on reservoir fishing, and now we're seeing anglers get back interested in rivers, again, mainly because they have access to those rivers through paddling and otherwise. Here's a photo of the Devil's River in southwest Texas near Del Rio, and smallmouth bass, largemouth bass fishing opportunities that occur there. And to give you an idea of some of the economic values that are tied to these river fisheries, we have roughly a 12-mile reach of the Guadalupe River that's situated between Austin and San Antonio, downstream of Canyon Reservoir. And in the winter months, this is a trout fishery. In the summer months, a lot of tubing that goes on there. And all water recreation was recently estimated at about 84.2 million in annual economic value to Comal County, that area that's again located there between San Antonio and Austin. So that's probably our most economically valuable reach of river in the state. But we have some other really magnificent reaches of river. The Llano, the South Llano are shown here. Cichlid. It's the only cichlid that occurs in Texas that's native to Texas anyway. And Guadalupe bass, our official state fish, that's shown there on the top right. And the area west of the Austin-San Antonio corridor, known as the Texas Hill Country. This is a karst limestone region, a lot of spring-fed streams. And we did a recent economic impact study that showed 71.6 million in economic value from stream fishing over a 16-month period. So a lot of communities are seeing the value of those freshwater resources for paddling, fishing, other outdoor recreation, and economic benefits to their communities from helping provide access to anglers and paddlers. Here's another really short reach of stream that's near our Colorado Bend State Park on the Colorado River, upstream of Austin. So just over a 3-month period, 2.8 million economic value tied to this white bass fishery as they make their spawning migration up from a downstream reservoir into this reach of the Colorado River. And so the streams where we have good access, they're really economically valuable for recreation, and all of those provide some sort of downstream water supply to downstream communities. One thing that's impacting our ability to expand recreational opportunities on rivers statewide in Texas is the fact that only 5% of the Texas landscape is in public ownership. So it's really difficult to access rivers. Most rivers in the state, if I won't get too far into the laws, but if they average 30 feet or wider, that's the general guidance there for paddlers. From that point downstream, it's state-owned stream bed, and the public has the right to navigate those areas. And that's even in areas that are karst and maybe a stream goes subsurface or maybe loses flow from time to time. I mean, there's still this legal right for the public to be able to paddle or even hike up and down that stream bed. But the land adjacent to the stream is typically privately owned, with the exception of some city, county, state parks, and other public lands that are held along those streams. So when you ask Texas paddlers what their top concerns are, they say, inadequate river flows are a top concern, and then lack of quality river access is the other big concern. We surveyed our Central Texas anglers. These are mostly fly anglers that are targeting our state fish, Guadalupe bass, which is shown there. And about 53% of those surveyed, they use canoes, kayaks, float tubes to get access, and a little larger percentage use wade fishing to obtain access. We also ask them, like, what are the issues that we as a state Fish and Wildlife Agency should be working on? And 74% said we need better river access, and then that was second to 94% of folks who said water quality and fish habitat improvements are a top priority. So this kind of reaffirmed some of those investments that we're already making in habitat restoration and preservation, and it led us to start to invest more in river access programs. And so back in the 2006 timeframe, we launched the Texas Paddling Trails program, where we partner with local communities, usually a city or county that has a park that's along a river, and we'll work with them to establish that as a formal Texas Paddling Trail access site. And there are quite a few requirements that go with that in terms of maintaining the site and some of the signage and maintaining a kiosk and good information for the public. And we're looking for kind of family-friendly reaches of stream where kids and their parents can go paddle and kind of experience a more wilderness type setting, but often close to urban areas. So we have 93 access areas that have been established on rivers throughout the state, and a lot of interest from local communities in this program. There's similar Blue Way programs or river trail programs in states around the country, often administered through their tourism or parks or Fish and Wildlife agency. But that program only gets us so far because we're using public lands as access. And again, as I said earlier, a lot of private lands in Texas. So we launched off into a new program where we're leasing private lands for public access. So we established these river access agreements with private riparian landowners where they allow the public to launch canoes and kayaks from that side. And we try to be strategic in setting those up upstream or downstream from an existing public access area, usually upstream or downstream from a paddling trail put in. And we established 24 of these access areas through these lease agreements over the last 6 years, and we're slowly expanding that program as we find sustainable sources of money to make that happen. So a quick example, here's that same reach of the Guadalupe River that I mentioned earlier. That's the most economically valuable in the state. There's only one public access site downstream of Canyon Lake, and that's at Army Corps of Engineers Park that's at the top of that figure there on the left. And the other triangles that are shown are places where we established lease agreements with either campgrounds or tubing companies. And so we put out creel survey boxes and game cams to kind of document use of the sites. And we had over 1,200 users per month. We did, through our surveys, our creel surveys, we asked questions about spending habits of some of those anglers and whether they're using hotels or going out to eat lunch or dinner, that sort of thing. And we calculated over $100,000 per month in angler expenditures from use of those sites. Looking at our investment in the lease payments, our investment in trout stocking within the winter months, we had about a 10-to-1 and 19-to-1 return on investment for each of those leases. So really beneficial program that we're working to expand. Here's another example from the Llano River that's west of Austin. There was a city park and a state park and no other access within the watershed. So most of the recreation really just occurred at those parks. And we added some additional leased fishing access areas and some paddling trail access areas at the parks, and now opened up about 18 miles of paddling just on that one tributary of the Llano River, the South Llano River, and then downstream using a couple of public access sites that were 21 miles apart. That's way too far for most people to paddle in a day. We added some additional leased access sites in between and created this opportunity for folks to paddle, 5 to 7 mile reaches of stream. So really opening up the door for kayak fishing, birding, other forms of recreation on those streams. And so issues with funding, we needed to find a way to support these lease payments to landowners. And so again, went back to our Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, our official nonprofit partner. They established this program called the Conserving Texas Rivers Initiative, and brought in their young philanthropy group, which is referred to as the Stewards of the Wild. And this is like under 40 young philanthropists that go out and do service projects and help do fundraising events and so forth. And then we also established a new license plate, the Texas Rivers Conservation License Plate. So anyone that buys this license plate, they spend $30 a year to keep the plate on their vehicle. And usually when you buy a plate, you keep it for 6 years. And so 22 of the $30 goes to Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to support this river access program. So that money gets leveraged as a non-federal cost share for federal grants through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to support our leasing program and also our paddling trails program. And here's some photos of some of those young philanthropy groups that have helped us with river cleanups and some of our fish monitoring projects and habitat restoration. Here's some of our partners out doing trash cleanups on the South Llano River, and then on the bottom doing a trash cleanup on the lower Colorado River. And so we get people out to do these trash cleanups, which aren't really directly in the mission statement of our agency. I mean, it's great to have folks get out there and remove trash and build goodwill among riparian landowners who really don't want to have a lot of recreational users out there if they think that they're leaving trash behind and that they're not respecting the area. And so they help us build goodwill, but usually what happens is this is kind of a gateway activity where folks start to care about their local hometown stream, their home waters, their home ground, and then they'll start to want to know a little bit more, and we can start to talk to them about issues like water management, and we can talk to them about water management plans and dam operations and downstream releases and water quality issues and habitat issues. And slowly they start to get more engaged and graduate from a trash cleanup to maybe one of those riparian planting projects, or maybe they become more of an advocate for other sorts of issues related to water quality or quantity or water management. So it's kind of a good gateway for folks to feel like that they're getting their hands dirty, doing something meaningful to help conserve a river. So we buy these citrus fruit bags, these river cleanup bags, provide those to local organizations, fly fishing clubs, other Texas master naturalist groups like that want to put these river cleanups on. And then we'll also provide some small grants to partnering watershed alliances and river conservancies that are interested in doing working days events, smaller habitat projects. So we'll provide smaller grants, $2,000 to $5,000, usually somewhere in that ballpark, to purchase plant materials or equipment or supplies that are needed to put on these habitat projects. So this has really helped us build relationships with a lot of those local watershed alliances that are connected with local communities, and it's helped us spread the word to private landowners who may be interested in working with us on access projects, or who have invasive riparian plants along their property, or who have an erosional bank because of overgrazing or some other issue that we can, because of that relationship that gets built, we can start to work with them to implement some sort of restoration project. So these are the types of projects that are going on in Texas that have a habitat focus, but obviously some water quality benefits, or some stewardship interest among local communities, local partners that you can work with. And most other state fish and wildlife agencies, like I said earlier, have comparable programs as what we have going in Texas. And so it may be maybe somewhat difficult for you to reach out and connect with the right folks within those fish and wildlife agencies, but most of those states have a really active chapter of the American Fisheries Society. We have a Texas chapter of the American Fisheries Society. That's where most of the folks that work within this arena, the projects that I've highlighted today, most of our folks that work on these projects are heavily engaged in that society. But yeah, it really comes down to trying to make a personal connection with those programs and try to understand what their interests are, what their priorities are, what watersheds they're working in, what rivers they're working on, and what they're trying to accomplish. And hopefully, if you can make those kind of build those kind of relationships, then you can start to look at, okay, well, they're trying to restore grasslands to support aquifer recharge, to support spring flows and river flows for that species, but everything that they're doing there is providing some sort of water supply benefit. And oftentimes municipalities will be investing in real similar activities, and there are definitely opportunities to leverage resources, whether that's planning assistance or technical guidance or just expertise in on the ground restoration, delivery, and how to implement certain BMPs. So I do think that there are a lot of opportunities for folks in the water world to, particularly those that work within the water supply, wastewater management type arenas, to cooperate with fish and wildlife agencies. And some of the projects that I've referenced today, we had that kind of participation, and I can point to some really proactive municipalities in Texas, like the city of San Antonio and city of Austin, that have these programs where they've invested heavily in conservation easements, land preservation to protect aquifer recharge areas, other sorts of investments to protect those same types of habitats, but maybe also provide some sort of recreational access amenity for the public. So yeah, a lot of really great work that's going on by municipalities around the country, and resources that are available through fish and wildlife agencies. So I would encourage you to connect with your state fish and wildlife agency. There's my contact info again. If you're from Texas and you'd like to connect with me, please reach out by email. There's my email on the screen. If you want to ask me questions, if you're from another state, I do interact a fair bit with my counterparts and other fish and wildlife agencies around the U.S. So I'm happy to try to put you in touch with the right person if you have any questions. So please don't hesitate to send me an email if you have any feedback on today's presentation, or follow-up questions, or want me to try to help you make a connection in your state. I'd be more than happy to do so. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. This is Brian. And as offer goes for you all, I'm ex-U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in headquarters. I know I'm very familiar with some of our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service programs that may also be a benefit to you all. Some of them Tim sort of included in some of the slides. One of the things that we do, we have a program on fish habitat, fish passage that might help you with dam removals and things like that. So anyway, there's a bunch of different opportunities for you all, and I think with that, if you have questions, you can post them out to the on the chat board, and Savannah is behind the scenes, so is going to relay them on to us, but hopefully we can make some connections. So.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Tim, for that presentation. And as Brian said, at this time, folks, if you wanted to submit any questions that you have, we can get that going for the Q&A. But before we jump into the Q&A, there are just two last details to cover. The Environmental Finance Center does offer one-on-one technical assistance to small water systems. If you would like to learn more and get connected with experts on some of these topics, please let us know by filling out this poll. We do offer a wide variety of areas of expertise that we can assist you with. So even if you just wanted to learn some more, please let us know and we can get that information over to you. And we will leave this open for just a few more seconds here. And we'll get ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, in the chat box, there is a evaluation link. If you could just let us know and take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts and any feedback of today's webinar, that would be very appreciated and extremely beneficial to us. So thank you for that. And we did receive a few questions, so I'm going to just jump right in. Okay. And so for any questions that do not get answered on the call right now, we will be able to follow up with you in an email. GoToWebinar records everything. So Tim and Brian, if you can jump in at any point as well, please feel free. This is a long question. There's a little bit of backup information and then the question. So an attendee wrote, the 2018 Farm Bill directs 10% of all NRCS conservation programs to target source water protection. Each state conservationist, with input from the State Technical Committee, must identify priority areas and conservation practices for source water protection. So how can state fish and wildlife agencies work with utilities, clean water administrators, etc., to identify areas and practices that mutually benefit source water and fish and wildlife?
I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Brian can add to it. But you know, I serve on the wildlife subcommittee of the State Technical Advisory Committee in Texas. So I'm engaged with other wildlife agencies, and we're putting forward recommendations on best management practices and specific types of restoration designs and conservation practices that we would recommend be implemented in certain areas to benefit terrestrial species and aquatic species. And then, you know, those recommendations from the wildlife subcommittee then get made to the State Technical Advisory Committee that would then adopt priorities. And there's a similar water subcommittee that just formed in Texas. And I think that there are likely similar subcommittees that are established under state technical advisory committees and other states that help, you know, inform investments in the, you know, Farm Bill conservation delivery programs. And I would imagine that 10% it's going to be delivered through a lot of the ongoing programs like EQIP and, you know, the stewardship programs that support conservation easements and riparian restoration and a lot of the same types of things that I highlighted today. And at least in Texas, there are already a number of those active EQIP initiatives that are underway that already have that kind of water conservation focus. And so I would imagine that, for example, in Texas, I think that there would probably be continued investments in some of those same programs. We haven't had our you know, we'll be having a winter wildlife subcommittee meeting in Texas, and I'm sure we'll be providing some input on source water protections, or at least looking at the existing set of priority areas that have been established around the state and understanding what those initiatives are doing for source water. protection. But yeah, I think there are plenty of opportunities for those water utilities to engage in subcommittees of the state technical advisory committees. And you could Google state technical advisory committee for your state and likely find USDA web pages that describe what the subcommittees are and who the committee chairs are, and you can shoot those folks an email, give them a phone call, and find out when they're meeting or what opportunities there are to help inform or influence what the priorities are within your state.
Brian, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
No, Tim's response covered it well. Kansas is one of the folks that's taking advantage of that. I believe in our state, our state water office has coordinated some meetings, and we're actually one of our projects gets touted, with the RCPP funding. That's in the Milford Lake watershed, which is a watershed that's got blue-green algae issues. But yeah, Tim's response on how to get engaged is spot on. I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you both. And so the remainder of the questions that have been submitted are more specifically looking for contacts in specific states. So for folks on the call that did submit questions regarding contacts in each state, we will be able to follow up with you via email offline. And so right now, those are the only questions. That is the only question that has been submitted. So Brian, do you have any last minute questions, or Tim, you as well, last minute details that you would like to wrap up on?
I don't. Tim, you did an excellent job, and I'm hoping the folks that participated in the webinar think about it from your state perspective, because like Tim repeatedly said, I mean, Texas's programs are not unique to the state. I mean, most of your state fish and wildlife agencies have very similar things going on, and Tim, you had a great example of Tim gave a great presentation on how it's working in Texas. So with that, Tim, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, nothing else to add. I appreciate the time. Hope it was beneficial to everybody that tuned in.
Thank you both so much. If there's any follow-up dialogue that happens offline, we'll make sure that we all get connected on that. So I know we're a few minutes early, but at this rate, there have been no more questions that were submitted, but you can always follow up with us. Brian and Tim's email information is on the screen right now, or you can email the Small Water Systems Network general email. Well, on that note, I want to wish everybody a good afternoon, and thank you again, Tim, and thank you again, Brian, for moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.